Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? We're going to delve into the old COVID-19 topic again, just because of some recent events. But apart from that, all things seem okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they are for the moment where we are. Obviously, there's things happening in Sydney at the moment. But apart from that, it's almost Christmas. It's summertime. And why or how can you not be happy?
Yeah, absolutely. So just quickly before we delve into that, just want to just a quick apology from last week. We lost your video thanks to a little bit of a technical glitch, an unknown one that's happened once before with the Mac. So I'm not entirely sure what was going on with the screen recorder there, but we got all the audio. So that, I guess, is the most important part. But we'll make sure that hopefully, fingers crossed, we see you through the whole episode this time. And the one other thing I wanted to touch on was I said a couple of weeks ago I'd be playing around with the new 12 Pro Max that I've got, and I'll just overlay some footage now. But the hot air balloons that were out this morning, thought it was a good opportunity as they were flying by the window just to take some video of it using the three lenses and testing out the digital zoom, and it was I was quite impressed with the results, mostly with the digital zoom, I think, because like we were saying before we got on, that in the good old days, a digital zoom just didn't cut it once you went past the optical zoom. But the last shot where I went in really tight onto the balloon using, I think it was around 7 or 8x digital zoom, and I don't think you could really tell.
No, look, it's lovely video, Ben. Well done. I don't know, throw away your SLR and just go with an iPhone.
Well, I mean, it's almost like it does it for you, really. You just have to be able to hold it steady and keep on track with it. One other thing I did want to mention is that I was playing around with the new RAW feature that was in there, which was interesting. It adds some more functionality in terms of manipulating shots afterwards. But yeah, I think we were discussing this before we got on too about it might get to a point where that's not even really necessary either, or they develop the codec to a point where it allows for that manipulation to occur without sort of that raw overhead, because the files are so much bigger at the moment.
That's right, and I think that's something we'll definitely see in coming years. And it's interesting that they still I guess make the cameras a selling feature, but I think probably most people don't really appreciate how good those cameras are.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to our main topic now. So we're coming back to the coronavirus again, been a frequent topic this year, if no one had noticed. And I guess in terms of Australia, I guess we got another wake-up call in the past week with a new cluster developing in New South Wales, seemingly out of nowhere. There was some initial concerns about a bus driver catching it from an international airline crew, but the actual cluster hasn't yet been linked to that, or I'm sure that probably is what will end up happening when they do all the contact tracing, etc. But it has, I guess, exposed another, I don't know, maybe potential issue in the quarantining system. The hotel, the big lockdown that Melbourne experienced was directly traced back to a breach in hotel quarantine, and it still seems to be something of an issue in terms of some tighter rules are probably going to have to be applied in that area to prevent this sort of thing from happening.
Absolutely, and just interestingly, I think they did some work on the Adelaide cluster, and they reviewed hundreds, I think maybe 400 hours of video, and didn't actually see any breach of protocol, which is quite interesting. So there are obviously a number of things came together, a bit like air crash investigation that caused the transmission. Yep. It was no one single thing, which goes to show you, when you're battling a virus, if it's there, it's there, and it is really hard in confined, especially indoors, to stay safe.
And I think just for the the public in general, it sort of reminds everyone about the concept of staying vigilant during these times, that we're living in a very unpredictable environment. And that's not to say that you're going to walk out the door one day and catch COVID. In our country, we're quite lucky in that regard, that it's we haven't really had that much of an outbreak, compared to a lot of other countries overseas. But it does have impacts, and I guess the biggest impact in terms of the public is that restrictions are starting to get announced again by other states. That's affecting travel plans, and given that this is Christmas time and people are going to visit family and friends and whatnot, all of that's gotten thrown into disarray in a way, and that's something that I think a lot of people still need to keep in mind, that it's still something that needs to be dealt with, has to be kept in the back of your mind when you're actually trying to arrange anything or do anything, that this sort of thing could happen.
And yet again it has, and it's amazing, isn't it? We thought there was no coronavirus really in South Australia, but then it got out, and it's happened now in Sydney as well. So yeah, that whole idea of complacency, I don't think it's so much around the complacency of people not keeping their distance or washing their hands. It's just more the fact of thinking we're through this, and it goes to show you never are.
Yeah, just on that, I'll leave the program to be nameless, although you can probably determine what it is after I've described it. But there was a program on TV that I saw the other day that did a summation of 2020, and while most of it was pretty good, the unfortunate message they were sending at the end was, we got through it. They had a nice sentimental, sort of musical ending, and it was like, oh, it's all over. And it's like, actually, guys, no, it's not over. And I almost wanted my half hour back that I spent watching the show, even though they had a lot of other good stuff in it.
Yeah, it was funny. I saw that too. It was quite interesting to watch it develop and look back over the year. So, but yeah, I even think that while the vaccine will, obviously protect us from the virus itself, I think the effects of the virus and the restrictions around it will last for some time.
Absolutely. So speaking of vaccines, let's just touch on what's happening in the States now specifically, because they've done I guess the UK did it first with the authorising, that first vaccine to be used. But I wanted to touch on what the developments in the US in the past week, because the Pfizer and Moderna ones are getting there as well. And I think the Pfizer one has been, and I think Moderna just got authorised for use, and that's starting to go out, and you've got public figures getting in front of the cameras, getting their jabs so that they can advertise that it's all, kind of safe, and, this is all fine and everything. It's interesting that there isn't just the one vaccine. I think we've talked about that before, but there can be multiple options. And I think also just the concept of how these particular vaccines work, using fragments of the virus to train the body to fight it, is actually, it's really fascinating to me that, we have the wherewithal and the intelligence, I guess, to be able to create something like this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the original vaccines were basically, quite primitive compared to today. So the original ones were using an inactivated but real like antigen and injecting it to stimulate antibodies. But the three ones we have now are mRNA, which is effectively genetic material which will code for the antigen. That then gives a very strong immune response. And the mRNA stuff is Moderna and Pfizer, both mRNA, and they're strong. They provoke very strong and very specific immune reactions in the body. And interestingly, the mRNA vaccines have also been used in fighting cancer. So they're very modern, very sort of interesting vaccines.
And it seems like the major difference from what I've been able to tell is just more storage requirements between the two. From what I understand, one has to be kept at very cold temperatures, while the other doesn't, and that I guess adds more of a logistical issue more than anything else in terms of getting it out there.
That's right, and it would have to do with the actual mode of delivery. So in your vaccine vial, you'll have lipids which will transport the mRNA into the cells, and probably it's a combination of what you have to make keep the vaccine active for that time. So obviously Moderna have a more robust or probably maybe a stronger sort of delivery system that can withstand, obviously. Well, still needs to be frozen, but doesn't need to be super frozen.
Yeah.
And which is interesting. I don't know much about the other vaccines because there's viral vaccines. So I think the AstraZeneca one from Oxford is a viral vector, which uses a virus to insert genetic code to boost the immune response. And then there are protein subunits, which are more like the traditional vaccines, except these are usually produced by specially engineered yeast cells that create a small fraction of what the COVID spike, say, would look like, and that's what provokes the immune system. And I'm not sure what their requirements are, for instance, in terms of temperature.
And it's not something that they're going to stop working on. It'll just be, again, returning to the theme that we're not through this yet, or it's not over. There's going to be still a long way to go in terms of the course of this, and this is also a part of it as well. I guess just wrapping all of that up and returning to the concept of uncertainty in the current times is also looking at it from the government perspective, I guess, in terms of, I think, governments like to produce long-term forecasts, medium-term forecasts or whatever, particularly when it's got to do with the budget and money and how they spend it, etc. And this whole entire scenario really throws a monkey wrench into a lot of that stuff. So I think there was some forecasting that was discussed this week in terms of Australia and how all of the assumptions were that it would be in a COVID-safe Christmas by the end of the year, and then bang, the New South Wales cluster pops up, and it's like, and then borders start coming down. So so for instance, an assumption that the borders would all be open, that's thrown into question, and it must be really hard at a government level to try and keep on top of that and try and, I guess, attempt to forecast what they can do and go forward when anything could change in an instant.
Oh, that's right. I mean, I still think in Australia that not quite sure that our approach has really been that moderate. It's been a very extreme approach, and there's all sorts of arguments around that. And I think we see it every time there's a COVID case and the state starts shutting borders. Just seems a little bit extreme to me. When you have maybe 10 or 15 people infected. And to be fair, all it takes is one of them to be on the plane interstate, but the likelihood of that is pretty low. They seem very draconian when they just shut the borders and tell everyone to stay inside. So it's interesting. I think that's creating a lot of issues, and obviously travel restrictions will ease in the new year, assuming the Sydney cluster is under control, but I really can't see probably until another 6 months that we'll really see anything even like normal travel in Australia.
Absolutely. And forget about international travel for longer than that. And that's largely because of what's going on overseas, because things are kind of getting worse over there. And maybe that's another thing, if we're talking about the complacency angle, is that I guess we're quite fortunate with the lack of significant breakout in Australia compared to other countries. And it can be very easy to think that, it's not that bad.
Well, that's right. And that's where the complacency comes in. The fact is you've either got no virus or you're going to have a lot of virus. And the rest of the world has proved that. So, it's easy to grumble about the steps we've taken, I guess, but the reality is we really don't have COVID in this country. There's an ever-present threat of it breaking out, but we really don't have COVID. All you have to do is look at what's happening in the US or some of the other countries that are very, very hard hit. And that's what happens if you don't do anything about it. So it's and that's complacency. I guess in the States there probably wasn't even complacency; it was just lack of action. and look at what's happened to them. So it can be very serious if you don't have any means of controlling or preventing the spread.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. We're almost at the end of the year. I think we can probably squeeze one more episode in, maybe our final wrap up before we see the year out. And it'll be interesting times. I'm looking forward to sort of like this end of the year sort of semi-little hiatus that we tend to have because it's been a year like no other. So I'm looking forward to it even more than normal, I think.
Are you travelling, Ben, over Christmas?
Yeah, but not by plane. I've made arrangements to ensure that there's no air travel or going through airports. More just as not so much about catching the virus. It's more about the fact that I don't want a border slamming shut down on me while I'm still in the air, because there've been a couple of stories around that happening as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy, but I guess from one perspective, I can see that point.
Exactly. All right, so don't forget our website, SciTechCulture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, our RSS feeds, and watch us on any and all of your devices. And we greatly appreciate your visits to our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.